Hey everyone! My name is B, Ironics of a Cosplay, and welcome to my YouTube channel where I make cosplays, crafts, and other weird crap. And today I'm making a giant key. Now originally this giant key was going to be for an Alice in Wonderland cosplay. That never really happened. Maybe will one day, but not today. But instead I've turned it into a giant key to base it off the keys that you can find in the video games for Little Nightmares and Little Nightmares 2. I made this a few months ago because we did a Little Nightmares duo group at Katsucon. My best friend and I did, and it was a lot of fun. But we wanted a giant key prop because it was just a fun idea. And I already had the base of this. You'll see where the footage jumps from 2022 to 2024. But I already had the base of it, so I just had to spruce it up to make it work for us. I will say there were a lot of things that I would probably change if I were to remake this key, but you have to remember I started making this key 2 years ago, and then I stopped, and then I started again, so it's a little weird, but we're good. So anyway, that's enough chitter chatter. Let's jump right in and get started on making this huge key. So as I said at the beginning of this video, I was originally making this to be an Alice in Wonderland prop, but that cosplay fell through. Maybe one day I'll go back and do it, but I don't know if that'll happen anytime soon. If you know the video games, Alice Madness Returns and Alice Madness, I think it's just the first one, by American McGee, or maybe it's just American McGee's Alice, I don't know. But regardless, I was going to cosplay from that. It didn't happen. I would like to still do it one day. But I realized that after I made the base of this, and you'll see the very stark jump in like filming setup from 2022 to 2024, you will see the difference. And I realized at the end of 2022 that I was like, you know what, I don't want to get rid of this key. I could still use it for something. I still had hopes for maybe doing the Alice costume. And then my best friend decided that, you know, we should go to Katsu together because I went. My best friend wanted to go and he had never been. So we were like, screw it. And we decided to do a few costumes that were together. And we decided to be Six and Mono from Little Nightmares 2. And if you've never played that game, you should really check it out. It's very creepy and awesome. But we had a lot of fun. If you want to check out my vlog for our trip to Katsucon, you can click it. It'll be right there. Right in that corner bit for you. So the first thing that I did was draw out the key larger so I knew what size I would want to make it in real life. Now, I've seen a lot of artists do, like, Kamui cosplay is the first cosplayer that comes to mind, where if it's a file from a video game, what they'll do is they'll upload it into like Photoshop or something like that, export it to print to size, essentially. I do not have a printer, so that's just not an option for me. So it's much easier. Oh my goodness, I just hit my microphone. I'm so sorry. It's much easier for me if I just draw it out myself. Now, as for this pile of cardboard tubes, I used to be an intern at a children's theater, and one of the teachers I worked with said that she never threw away any of her toilet paper rolls or paper towel rolls because they make great bases for props and for crafts for children, and I held on to that viscerally. So I started saving a lot of my paper towel rolls, a lot of my toilet paper rolls, so I could use them eventually in a project. I will say the stronger rolls tend to be in like aluminum foil, plastic wrap, that kind of thing. They're just like reinforced, but basic paper towel rolls will do the same kind of thing for you. I also ended up saving a lot of my boxes from like Keurig cups just because I hate waste, and even though we make a lot of waste, especially as crafters, I try to cut down on that. So I end up, I don't want to say hoarding because that has a negative mentality, but I do end up saving a lot of stuff that I think I might be able to use in the long run. Now I will say, if you're going to keep a lot of recyclable materials for your projects, I will say one of two things. Either one, only save pieces that you know you're going to use for a specific project, or two, if you just hoard generic pieces for not even just cosplay, just crafting in general, make sure that you set a deadline for like how long you're going to be willing to have that stuff in your house, because the last thing you want is for it to pile up like crazy. I have a couple of boxes now that I need to go through because I haven't maintained that rule. So, but that cleaning is for another day. Now, I put these tubes together by basically shoving one end into the other and then taping them together and then taping those two tubes together. So it was 4 tubes all taped together. Well, technically all of this is taped together. I think hot glue would work just as good. I do think wrapping it in something was the more secure option. I wish that I had almost like, I don't know if this is a thing, but like Mod Podge tape would be genius. I'm thinking like a thin like tissue paper, but not too thin so it actually holds together kind of tape, so you can wrap it. I'm sure like gauze or something would work just as well. I will also say though, if you're going to work with cardboard, just be prepared that it is a pain to work with at times, honestly. It doesn't bend the way you always want it to. It's not always super strong, but it's also not always super flexible. While it is cheap and you can even get it for free sometimes from places, it also doesn't always want to work the way that you want it to. So just be ready for that. Just know that you might have an idea and think that you can use cardboard for it, but sometimes foam is the better option. Sometimes paper is the better option. Sometimes fabric is the better option. Just keep your mind open while crafting, because while yes, saving money is good, the idea of sticking to saving money as opposed to getting your prop to look the way you want just seems detrimental to you as a crafter. So keep that in mind. Now, as I was building the structure of what I guess I'll call the teeth of the key, is that what they're called? The teeth of the key, the pointy bits, I realized that I wanted something that was going to wrap around them just to be a little more secure. The cardboard was doing a great job, but I wanted a little bit of just printer paper to help keep it extra secure. I think cardstock would have done a better job at securing this together, but I didn't have cardstock. Now, to insert these key teeth, I just cut 2 slits in the side that were the length of the key teeth themselves and cut a little rectangle to shove the key teeth into. I honestly don't know what I'm shoving in there. I think I'm just taping more of the paper on the inside because I know I won't be able to once it's in there. And I left that little piece of cardboard out at the bottom so that way I could shimmy it in there and glue it down. And then I went to absolute hot glue town on this bad boy. So I put hot glue in every little nook and cranny that was humanly possible. I probably should count. I have no idea how many hot glue sticks I went through the creation of this project over the course of 2 years. I will say though, using hot glue is not always the neatest part of a project. I think hot glue is great for pieces that don't, like parts of the project that you won't see. Like, I don't think hot glue was a terrible idea now that I went back and covered it in fabric, but like if I was just planning on leaving it, the hot glue leaves too many bumps and strings and it looks messy and sometimes can look unprofessional. And if that's something you're worried about, 1, probably don't use cardboard as your base, but 2, if you're going to maybe use, honestly, you'd probably be better off using Elmer's glue. And like they have a gosh, I wish I could remember what it's called, but it's an Elmer's glue that's basically like wood glue. I mean, it's wood glue basically. Wood glue is just stronger Elmer's glue. But I think if I were to do it again, I would build the entire structure out of cardboard and then wrap it in a single layer of paper before wrapping it in fabric. I think that's what I would have done. Or maybe instead of a single layer of paper, maybe not a single layer of paper, but wrap it in paper. But instead of that, I might have also done like wrapping it in a single layer of foam after building the base and then wrapping it in fabric. Now, I also believe in recycling, and so afterwards I took my sketch of the key, I rolled it up, and I used it to reinforce part of this project because I realized I had 3 pieces of paper in front of me and knew that I wasn't going to need to use the sketch anymore because I already knew kind of what I was doing. And I was like, well, I have the sketch in my mind. If I really need to go back, I can just draw it out and base it on the shape that I already have going. So I rolled it up like just the biggest joint you've ever seen. And then put a tape on it to secure that corner and then proceeded to wrap it around the handle of the key for extra security. It looks like a giant flute, honestly. Like a terrible, terrible flute. But I wrapped it around where the handle would be so I could essentially make the shape of it, because I knew I couldn't make cardboard work that way, but I knew I could make paper work that way. So I figured it would be much easier if I just got some paper. I think I ended up having to get some more paper, but if I got some paper and made it the shape that I wanted, it just worked out easier. And then my good old friend packing tape made another drop on the scene And I basically just went around, secured it so it wouldn't like crumple as I started to build on top of it. And then I ended up using more of the Keurig boxes as well as more paper to reinforce the structure of the handle of this key. So I ended up grabbing some just regular printer paper, cutting it into semi-equal length strips. Can't speak today. Cutting them into semi-equal length strips so I could wrap them around the base of this key. I started by hot gluing it, and I hot glued it a little bit onto the cardboard that was already there as the base of the handle, so that way when I wrapped it, it would be a little smoother in the process. There was some kind of craft as a kid that this made me think of while I was doing it. I have no idea what it was. There was something. So if you know what I'm talking about, there's the cardstock. Let me know. And then I ended up wrapping it enough and then realizing that foam would be the better option for this handle. And I had just a little bit left of this black foam. I wanted to use more of it for this project, but I only had a little bit. So I ended up going back over the cardstock and the paper with this foam so I could have a more secure handle, because I realized that that was the part that I was probably going to be holding a lot. Jump cut to the future where I realized that I hadn't been filming, but this is still in 2022. I don't know why I laughed like a Korok just then, you found me, but then I realized I wanted this whole base to be a little bit more secure, so after I did a couple more layers of foam around the handle and around the base of the actual structure itself, I went back and I would say paper mache is a strong word, because it was hot glued at the beginning. So paper mache is a strong phrase to use, but I did hot glue a lot of this. It's just an Aldi, the grocery store Aldi's. It's just one of their paper bags. Reduce, reuse, recycle. That's all we do in this bitch. That's all we do here, is reduce, reuse, and recycle as much as we can, not just because it's good for the environment, but because it's cheaper as well. And after it was all glued, I did put a layer of Mod Podge all over it, so that way it was a pretty solid structure. I mean, I could slam that thing on a table and it wasn't going anywhere. But that's kind of where the project ended. I had tried to cover it in paint, realized I hated how it looked despite like 3 coats of yellow paint, and then that is where the project stopped in 2022. Flash forward to 2023 now, and I've realized that this paint job is terrible, and it's kind of lumpy and bumpy, and it's not as pretty as my soul remembered it being. So I grabbed some craft foam, and I measured it out so I could cover it in yet another layer of craft foam. I also, to be clear, couldn't remember if I had already covered it in craft foam, which I had. I hadn't filmed it, and that's why I didn't know about it, is because I wasn't as good at keeping up with filming stuff back then as I am now. So I just completely lost that footage, or it never happened in the first place. But I went back, covered that bad boy in some foam. If you can't tell, I'm very excited about this project. I know it's already in the past, but I'm glad I'm finally making the video for it, because it was so fun to make, and it took me 2 years to make, and I'm just glad that it is out now, so, and for the world to see. And at this point in 2024, while I wanted to make sure that the foam laid nicely so it looked pretty on the key itself, I also knew that I was probably going to have to cover it in some sort of fabric, just so it looked a little nicer. And the reason I figured that out is because it is just so hard to get any sort of material to lay in a pretty manner on a rounded edge like this, this being the handle of the key. It just looks bumpy and ends up being all choppy because it's multiple pieces. It's just overall like not a super clean job. And I'm sure there's a way, if I had built this handle of the key differently, that I could make it look super nice and clean. But like I said, the handle's already made. I wasn't going back to break this piece down. It was already pretty structurally sound. I didn't want to destroy it only to rebuild it. At this point, because I wasn't competing with this, so I wasn't worried about it looking like super professional. I just wanted it to look good for when we were using it. And so I was okay with the handle being a little wonky if it meant that I had a key that looked cool. But yeah, so I basically cut a whole bunch of foam into strips, wrapped them around the key handle, and then took even smaller pieces of foam and filled the gaps because I didn't want any foam sticking out that was not fitting, but I also didn't want there to be too many gaps. So when I went back with fabric, it would like stick out. Now some of these gaps were so small I probably could have gotten away with just putting like foam or a hot glue in there instead of foam and like smoothing it out. But I was really meticulous about this foam work for some reason, so I wasn't gonna tell myself no. I was like, screw it, we're going for it. And I did. Also, if the shirt didn't give it away, this did take me a couple of days to wrap the entire thing in fabric, or in foam. I did find a better way to go about wrapping it, but it still had a lot of large gaps that I still inevitably had to go back over and fill in with more foam before I covered it with fabric. This is the key covered in all the foamy bits, and I think it looks pretty swell. As you can see, there are still some parts covered in yellow, but I was just too excited not to show it off a little bit. These parts got a little space weird because I end up having to go back and essentially remaking the little, I've been calling it the belt of the key, but it's that little piece of the key that like sticks off and is like a little wider out than the rest of the key. So I had to go back and like make that separate. Also, comment down below what you would use a giant key for aside from a keyblade. I feel like keyblade is the most obvious one, but if there's anything else that you would use a giant key for, I would love to hear the ideas. I would also love to know just like if there's media I'm missing out on that has giant human-sized keys or beings that are the size of keys. I'd love to know more about it. Like Little Nightmares, for example, the key is not necessarily a vital part of the game, but you do find keys throughout it. And so it's like, oh yeah, there are keys. Now, is this key screen accurate to the Little Nightmares key? Absolutely not. By no means. It doesn't look anything like it. But it is a key, and I'm not arguing with that. So, and it looked cool in the photos. So honestly, it's a win-win for me. I do sometimes wonder what 2022 me would think of 2024 me, not in like a grand like life scale, because that's not far enough away in time. 2022 me wouldn't be too surprised by 2024 me at this point. But I do think that like craft skill wise, I did grow a lot over the last couple years, so that seems pretty cool, honestly. This key was very much a trust the process project for me, but I'm glad I did trust the process and just let art for a second. There are things, of course, that I would go back and change, things that I would maybe do differently from the start, but you know what? That's okay. I think if I were to do a project like this again, I might plan out where the foam was going to go a little bit more, just so it was a little less hodgepodge. Because I think the next time I make a big prop like this, I'm going to paint it instead of using fabric on it. I just had a lot of this gold fabric that you'll see in a minute, and I wanted to get rid of it. What I ended up doing was I found I don't want to call it a Renaissance dress, because that's definitely not the right time period, but I did find a costume dress at a thrift store. The material on the skirt was terribly cheap. The top was made of like a cheap velvet. It looks terrible. But I got it because I was like, well, I can use the material for something. And I do. So, recycling for the win. But it was such a horrid material that the thought of actually wearing it on my person was just too nasty to even comprehend. So I just made sure that didn't happen. I will then proceed to break out the really terrible gold fabric. And gold is a strong word. I don't even know what... Gold and fabric are both strong words to describe this material. It is an abomination of fabric. Like, that's putting it nicely. It is like... It's too sheer to be a skirt on its own, but it was somehow... it felt itchy. It was nasty. But what I did do first was cut off all of the seams, because I had a feeling that showing the seams would distract from the key as a whole. There's still a few wrinkles and things in it, but also I didn't think that it would be safe to iron this material. It felt extremely flammable, and I think that even just an iron touching it would have burnt the heck out of it, or melted it, honestly. It was a little melty. I realized after I went back and like touched it with a hot glue gun some, that I was like, oh, this is melty. So But I went ahead, cut off all the seams. I actually saved those. I'm probably going to use them as trim for something down the line. I may not want to wear that material, but I can still trim the heck out of it and save it for a future project. The handle was honestly the hardest part of this entire project for me. The base, the little belt that I'll make later for around the base, even the teeth, they weren't that bad. But the handle was rough. I could wrap the other parts and then come back to the handle just because I knew it was going to be a pain. This material is also very thin, so I kind of wish that I had either gone with a different color foam, or I'm glad I went with white, just like a solid color underneath and not like red and green, because I feel like that would have shown way too much. But I think if I was going to do it again, I would have either gone with a yellow foam or just painted the foam that was here yellow as like a nice solid base color underneath, because I ended up having to like paint over it at the end. And while that helps it look less like fabric, it still isn't quite what I wanted. But I do think it turned out pretty solid just covering it all in fabric. It's also pretty big. I put it right next to my leg and it went like above my knee, touching the ground. So it's pretty nice. But there were still a lot of wrinkles and a lot of, I don't want to call them seams, but a lot of lines from where the fabric overlapped with each other. So I had to break out my Mod Podge so I could basically paper mache it while not using paper. I don't... Fabric macheing, is that a thing? Is there a term for gluing fabric over and over on each other like paper mache? I don't know. But I had to break out the glue and I realized that my paintbrush wasn't going to work, so I just grabbed another piece of foam and I used it as a brush to essentially coat everything. Eventually this piece of foam will get tossed to the wayside and I will just use my hands like the craft gremlin that I am. But I started with the foam nonetheless to at least appear official. I will say though, another problem with this fabric is that it was very stringy. It was very it fell apart quite easily. So I ended up having to go back and cut a lot of the little loose bits off before painting it, just because there were so many little strings and bits, especially on the inside of the handle, just from where fabric was wrapping over and over on itself. Also, I definitely couldn't get that one Mod Podge open, and I still don't think I could to this day. I haven't tried since, but I'm assuming it's just like permanently glued shut. Unless I get it open later in this, I don't remember. I kind of was in a crafting... I don't want to say I was crunching, but I definitely was. But I was in like a crafting manic state for like a good solid 2 months before this convention, where I was just crafting, working. And I may or may not have gotten that Mod Podge open because I don't remember. But Mod Podge was my best friend for this, so go Mod Podge. I will say, if you're going to Mod Podge something, especially something that has 2 sides, make sure that when you get down to the sides that you don't leave a very like defined line of where the Mod Podge is. Like, try and wrap it around a little bit underneath, so that way when you flip it over you can do the same thing on the other side and there won't be a distinct line between where you wrapped or where you glued on the first half versus the second half. Now, time for that little thing that I've been calling the belt. I did the same thing that I did for the rest of it, where if you were to flash back to 2022, that I did initially to make this shape, but instead I used foam instead of a coffee box. But I measured it out and wrapped it around so I could see like where I wanted it to go, and then I just cut it out, and I double checked to make sure that it was going to fit the way that I wanted it to. But I just cut it out, make it all nice and neat. And then I covered this piece with fabric also, so that way it matches the key itself. Now, I basically wrapped this piece of foam like you would wrap a Christmas present, by like tucking in the edges and everything like that. I measured out the length of the fabric that I was going to use and cut off the excess, so I wasn't trying to like fight too much fabric for such a small amount of foam. Just tuck that back under my desk. I'm sure that fabric has ended up somewhere lovely. But then I wrapped it like you would wrap a gift, folding over the edges and then folding over the ends. And I pulled it pretty taut so that way when you flip it over it looks nice and smooth. I wish I'd been able to do that with the key more, but just with the shape of it, it was kind of hard to finagle the fabric on the main part of the key to make it just as taut and as smooth as the rest of it. And then of course hot glue. Now I will say I'd already known that hot glue kind of melted this material, and you can see me pulling my fingers away because it's so hot and going straight through the fabric that it burns. But it also worked really well at adhering it. I think it's partially because it melted it that it worked so well, but you know, I don't know, worked good for me. But then I folded in the corner like you would for a present, just so that way it was a little smoother. I probably could have cut off more of the excess fabric because since I was gluing it straight to the key, it didn't matter if the underside was fully covered in fabric. So like I could have gotten away with cutting away more. But like I said, I think it ends up looking well. And I'm not mad about it. And then once I get all of these sides glued down and I've successfully burnt the ever-living heck out of my hands, I can then proceed to put it on the actual key itself. I already have a little place of where I know where I want it to go, so that's nice. I somehow ended up making it a little bit longer than the key itself. I think I somehow gave myself too much like extra material when making the foam shape, and I think what I should have done was cut the foam a little bit underneath the length that I needed it to fully be to wrap around, because when I added the fabric it added a little bit more material, and so I think overall it added a little bit too much material to it and it wrapped over a little bit. But you know what, that's okay, it still looks nice. I'm still very proud of it. But as you can see, the material is much smoother on that part of the key than it is the rest of the key. And I kind of wish that the whole key looked like the belt part, but I have learned to live with the speed build that I did for this. So, but I'm very proud of how it looks, so yeah. And then I started painting this after I started painting the 6 cosplay, and I wanted to add some cell shading to it so that way I could make it interconnect with both the key and the gnome, which will be the next video that you get to see, by the way. So what I did was watered down some paint because I didn't want to fully cover the gold that was underneath, and I just used dirty paint water because it didn't need to be pretty, and I had just like changed out the paint water, so I was like, if it's a little dirty it's okay. But then I just went over after I painted the cell shading and just covered the entire thing in a thin layer of like a dirty bronzy gold paint. This also helped because the color palette of 6 and the gnome is very muted, and the gold that was used for the base of this was very strong, and so it helped bring it all together just a little bit more. After that, it was all done. I gave it a nice solid coat, and then we were able to take it to the convention. And I really love how it turned out. We didn't get a lot of photos and videos with it, but I do think it is super cute. We didn't get a lot of videos with the key, but I do think it was a nice accessory to have. And we even met another mono, so we got to all show off our keys and our little gnome, and it was a great little time. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please leave a like on the video. Subscribe if you're new here and you want to see more of the stuff that I make, and leave a comment down below on what you would use a giant key for. I can't wait to hear all your ideas down below, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!